This is Grady Hendrix, and you are listening to Booked.
Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nunn. This week, no book, but we do have an interview. It is with Michael David Wilson, and here is his bio. He is the founder of This Is Horror, a professional writer, editor, and podcaster. His work has appeared in publications including No Sleep Podcast, Dark Moon Digest, and The Other Stories. His novella, The Girl in the Video, will be published later this month.
I had a thought, because you said this week's episode, and it's funny because, and I know we'll introduce Michael in a minute, but I was counting how many episodes we've done this year versus how many weeks there's been in this year, and we're a little ahead of the game. So I think this is like our 21st episode in like 18 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, we've been busy, and it's been fun. And I got to tell you, and clearly Michael will add to this, but the interviews have been really great. So we go back and forth, right? There's an ebb and flow. Some years we do a bunch of interviews, and then the following year we do like two, and it's not a lack of people that are willing to be interviewed. It's really how we feel about interviews at the time.
Yeah.
But I think we really kicked it off well with the first few this year that really got us in the mode. I think that really, if the first interviews we had this year would have been, just okay interviews, we might have been less likely to continue down this path. But I can tell you, in the next month, you're getting, including this one, probably 4 more interviews at this point. Who knows? A lot of interviews.
Yeah. So it's very exciting. So it's a fun time. But yeah, I think I agree. Like, it's that rotten apple spoils the bunch. If we had one where, not even that it was bad, but it wasn't just like, pushing our momentum forward, we'd just be like, whatever. All right.
Look, we've only had like maybe 2 bad interviews since we've been doing this podcast.
It's true.
Right? I mean,
it's true.
And that's out of a lot of interviews. So, I mean.
So we're fickle is basically what it comes down to.
Yep. Let's see if Michael can continue the trend of excellent interviews we've had this year on Booked. All right. We don't usually do this and add something in after the review. So that's why it might seem weird for those of you who are listening. We're going to add a disclaimer. Is that the opinions in the following podcast are not mine or Rob's or anybody's. Really, we get into some pretty explicit talk about some internet videos. So if you're weak-stomached or easily offended, I don't know, skip like 15 minutes in or something. That should give you enough time to get past it.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's been a few years, and it's like definitely way too long, but thanks for joining us to talk about your new book.
Yeah, it is great to be back after a half a decade hiatus. So I'm looking forward to this. It's been far too long.
All right, we're going to kick it off with the way I wanted to word this question that was vetoed is, what the fuck were you thinking? But let's go a different direction. Tell us a little bit in your own words about the girl in the video.
So, I mean, the way that we've pitched it in terms of the elevator pitch is that it is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. And essentially what's going on here is we have a teacher living in Japan who isn't actually me, even though I could understand why people might think, that sounds familiar. And he gets a bizarre and slightly arousing video. And like an absolute noob, he decides to click this cloaked bit.ly link and watch it. And then he starts wondering, is this a personalized video for me? Because there are things within the video that seem to be nodding towards him and his own personal history and his life. And slowly but surely, this turns into a kind of investigation as to the origin of this video. And then he starts to get more videos and the weirdness ramps up until its bizarre conclusion. And in terms of how the story actually came about, it came about when I was doing the 1 story per week challenge, which is pretty much exactly how it sounds. I was trying to write 1 story every week. And then Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing put out the Lost Films anthology call out. So I started drafting up an idea for that, which became The Girl in the Video. But it was pretty obvious that the story was going to be a lot longer than the call out for the anthology. So I got in contact with Max Booth and I asked him what the upper limits were. And well, he asked me, how long have you got? And I said, well, I think this is going to be 20,000 words. And he said, yeah, for an anthology, that is obviously far too long. So I thought that was that. But he said to send along the story anyway. And he liked it, offered me a contract, and The Girl in the Video was born. And now, I guess 3 years later, it's finally coming out.
All right, so I know you have to say that the teacher in the story is not you, but I mean, right? It's you, right?
There are a lot of elements within my fiction that are autobiographical, which for anyone who knows me will not find that a shocker and a big revelation. The teacher himself is definitely not wholly me, but I think most of the protagonists that I write, there are like a lot of nods and parts to my life. I think that's a way to make a lot of the stories authentic. Now, I know that Graham Joyce said that he had a similar approach to writing, and he said the bits that are real for him are normally the bits that you'd absolutely think were made up. Now, I'm not sure that I can actually say that, because a lot of the really weird bits in the story were not things that actually happened in my life. But I mean, a lot of the locations, even some of the characters, are based off people that I have known on my travels or places that I have been. And I think mixing that in with this kind of bizarre premise is something that hopefully has lent to the success and the positive early reviews that I've got. But I mean, I haven't received a weird and bizarre video, which I anticipate may be a question that you may be getting on to. And I know in your review you were talking about, you know, if you'd experienced anything similar to that. So regrettably, or possibly for the best, that has not happened. But I mean, that was something I was thinking about a lot, thinking about what would happen if you got one, what would happen if you then made every single bad decision, and thus The Girl in the Video is what we've got.
I've been staring at my Hello Kitty mask for like a week and a half now, and just thinking of how to utilize that in a video. So you never know. You may get exactly what you asked for in this book, just from a middle-aged American man. Instead of, you know, I don't want to say too much obviously about the story, but instead of from who the character, and I'm doing air quotes because we're all still pretty sure it's you, the character in the book does. One of the things that struck me is you seem to be very thorough with like hitting all the points, right? So the technology points. So you covered pretty much every communication medium that we use currently, at least in 2020, and a lot of internet lore and stuff. Is this naturally you, or did you have to look into? I don't think I've ever seen Bitly in a story before. You know what I mean? And that's something that people who use the internet a lot are familiar with. I mean, did you have to do any research into the tech aspects, or should I say the internet aspects of this book, or did this all just kind of come naturally to you?
To be honest, the vast majority, including those shock videos that we spoke about off air, I am familiar with. The only thing that I wasn't actually familiar with prior to this is the reverse TinEye image search. And I don't want to talk too much about how that turned up in the story, but it was actually Max Booth, so the editor, who said, hey, at this point, wouldn't using a reverse image search be a good idea? And I thought, yeah, that is a good idea. I'm glad that you're my editor, Max, and that was put into the story. But everything else, I mean, all the communication and the social media are apps that I'm familiar with. So it did come pretty naturally. There wasn't a lot of research that was required. And so obviously that made writing it easier for me, and probably again added that air of authenticity, because I mean, I've spoken about this with Bob Pastorella on This Is Horror podcast, but it can be so frustrating and so obvious when someone clearly does a bunch of research for a book and then they found out all these new things, and at the absolute worst, they kind of put it in the story as an info dump. And I mean, with the better writers of the genre, you don't tend to see that, but there have been times where I've read a story and I've thought, this actually looks like you kind of had a page of notes, and then you thought, oh, I'm just going to put it in the story. And I mean, that was something I absolutely didn't want to do. So, I mean, when I'm going through subsequent drafts, I'm trying to lose as many words as I possibly can and to convey what I want to convey minimally.
All right, let's get to the good stuff. Of all those shock videos you mentioned, which one's the absolute worst? Which one should somebody absolutely not look up the second they're done recording this interview?
Oh, God. Well, it's the one that you referenced in your review and you weren't familiar with, and that is swap.avi. So do you want me to just tell you what swap.avi is? I do not recommend you experience it. And I also, if you were to start watching it, I highly doubt you will get to the end of it. And that is not necessarily because of how shocking it is because of how long it is.
I think you should totally tell us about it. Now I almost feel challenged, like reaction video challenged. Let's see. What do you got? What is it?
Okay, so I presume you're familiar with Two Girls, One Cup. I didn't think I'd be saying that in a podcast or in most situations. Okay, so essentially, this is like the feature film length version of Two Girls, One Cup. So this is the same kind of thing, but it is a 90-minute feature-length film of that. And I'd say feature film. I mean, it's the same kind of production values as Two Girls and One Cup. And okay, look, for people who aren't familiar with this is essentially 4 women who are shitting into each other's assholes, eating shit, vomiting on the shit, vomiting into each other's mouths, and playing with that shit and that vomit for 90 minutes. And so I feel that I should explain how I'm even familiar with that, particularly if people, probably a lot of people have now turned off and unsubscribed to This Is Horror at this point. But I mean, when I was at university, me and my friends did like to kind of challenge each other with the most hardcore shock value things that we could. We'd change our desktop backgrounds. We would put videos on while the other person popped out of their room for them to come back to. It was a simpler time. That was the kind of thing that we got up to. And I think it was my friend, who's still a very good friend, who introduced me to that classic. I don't think I was the one who introduced him, though it is to date the most awful video that I think I've seen. I think as well, when I was early dating my wife, I was talking about shock videos, and for some reason I was like, you have to see this one. And for some reason she still married me, so I'm not sure what that says about me or what that says about her. But I think what I find funniest about Swap is that it's probably the only shock video that I can think of where it's actually known by its file extension name.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I'm going to kick in with my own little story. I think this might have to do a little bit with youth. So when I was considerably younger, so probably about 20 years ago, and probably that was right around the time, maybe 5 years ago, I was like the first person I knew that had the internet. Mm-hmm. So I was discovering all these wonderful things, right? So I'd be on like internet relay chat in like just the worst chat rooms in the world, like crime scene photo chat rooms, like downloading the most bizarre shit. But my favorite thing to do, are either of you guys familiar with the performer G.G. Allen?
Yeah.
So I had a G.G. Allen video that was a documentary that someone made. I think they made it right before he died because it included interviews with him, and there were some pretty terrible things in this documentary. It wasn't like rated, like it was released without a rating, so it's pretty much anything goes. And I'll tell you, someone would come over and I would grab the VHS tape and I'd say, "You've got to see this," and I'd sit him down for 90 minutes in front of a TV to watch a G.G. Allen documentary, which involved all kinds of bizarre bodily fluids and things. And now I find that in my late 40s, I'm not real likely to look up Swap AVI. But had I have caught wind of it, say 15, 20 years ago, I would have been a little more likely, I think, to check that out.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing. I feel that as a teenager and in my early 20s, like looking up anything that was like shocking or provocative. I mean, that was what me and my friends were all about. So yeah, the crime scene photos, like I remember when Saddam Hussein was executed, it's like, well, let's check out that video then. And I mean, you mentioned G.G. Allen, and that makes me think, like even music came into it. So it's like, well, I've got to listen to the band called Anal Cunt, primarily because they're called Anal Cunt, and then also all of their titles are just trying to offend and provoke people. I mean, probably the most famous is Hitler Was a Sensitive Man, followed by I Lit Your Baby on Fire, and that's the kind of thing that you would get from Anal Cunt.
I think G.G. Allen may have actually had a song called Anal Cunt, and I'm not trying to make a joke about it. I actually think that there might be a little bit of crossover there between those two performers.
Yeah, that would make sense as well if they got their name from G.G. Allen. In fact, as you were saying that, on their Wikipedia page, and we all know that is, of course, a great source of knowledge. It says that a common misconception is that the band is named after the song Anal Cunt by G.G. Allen. But in fact, Allen's song was written years after the band had formed.
Oh, interesting.
Wow. Contemporaries, muses to each other.
I'll get out of this by saying, in case anybody who's listening was not aware, I actually saw G.G. Allen the last time he performed in Chicago before he died. So I did get to see him live. So there you go.
And he's still washing up.
Yeah. A little bit of Anal Cunt G.G. Allen trivia is that Anal Cunt did, in fact, record a version of I'll Slice Your Fucking Throat If You Fuck Me, which was originally recorded by Allen. So I think that was a little tribute to him.
There you go. The more you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what anyone is going to do with that information, and I'm not necessarily sure if this is going to translate into people buying my book, or if it's going to. Maybe this conversation that we're having is going to make people think that this book is a lot more extreme than it actually is. I mean, a lot of the references to shock videos are in fact just references. But then again, the other day Max Booth said I should go back on his podcast ghoulish and we should just talk about shock internet websites and internet videos. And I said, do you think that that is necessarily going to translate into sales? And Max said, yes, 100%. So, you know, if Max, as the publisher, says it will, then he's obviously right. I mean, he would never say something just for the laugh.
Back to your actual book, video is a medium that's used, you know, pretty consistently throughout the book and not just in the way of all the crap we just talked about. So what made you think of the concept for those videos that the main character receives? Is that like a genre of something that you're into, or was it something you conceived of just for the book specifically?
I mean, that's a good question, and it's kind of difficult to remember the exact order that every happened in. I mean, I knew early on that I wanted the main character, Freddie, to get these videos from a girl that were both a little bit suggestive but also weird. And then I was thinking of the kind of art house and giallo kind of school of thought. And even though the lighting isn't mentioned a lot, I did imagine that these were the kind of things that would be bathed in a kind of red light and that you might go to some kind of weird show, which was in fact pretty cool to hear in the review that Livius picked up on a lot of that. So that hasn't been explicitly mentioned before in other reviews. But I mean, you did say that it brought to mind some of these kind of French shows that I can't remember if you said you'd been to or if you just seen them. But I was thinking of those things, and then for every video, it was like, well, how can I make this even weirder? And then towards the kind of center of the book, it's like, what if, as well as the videos, it starts like kind of seeping in to his dreams and his consciousness? And in doing that, I mean, it's almost as if the video it is a virus that has taken over his mind and that he's thinking about it. It's lingering, and also adding some of those things that were almost nonsensical or had logic gaps. It's like, okay, is this a trick of the video editing, or is there something supernatural going on here? And I wanted to just add that little bit of ambiguity and that doubt. But I think as well as art house and giallo, kind of thinking a little bit about what I could conceive of Rob Zombie creating for a music video if like everything was okay and there were no kind of rules. And I could totally imagine, you know, Sherry Moon Zombie kind of creating some of these bizarre videos. I feel that wouldn't be out of her kind of repertoire.
I'm sure lots of people have imagined Sherry Moon Zombie making all kinds of videos, including perhaps hosts on this podcast. So
yeah, it could be. And if people want more thoughts on what we think to Sherry Moon Zombie, they can check out an early episode, because I think it was Lords of Salem that we reviewed together with that reprobate John Costello.
Oh, right.
That's correct.
A long time ago.
Yeah. John Costello was someone who would always be very vocal about his thoughts towards Sherry Moon Zombie and other people. And well, he's not part of the podcast anymore. I can't confirm or deny whether that's why.
All right, so I mentioned this at the very beginning of our review of your book, and gave you a lot of praise. So I want to give you an opportunity to like just live in the fact that like you've got the best bio set up on your website of like anybody we've ever interviewed. Where'd that come from? Where'd you get the idea to have multiple different length bios on your website?
I mean, I was just thinking of it from a practical point of view, and the fact that if I'm looking for a bio because I've got a podcast episode or I've done an interview, that different mediums and different articles are going to require a different length bio. And I thought, rather than kind of play it and take it to chance by just having one bio, why don't I put 3 of them up for different reasons, and then people can select the one that is best for them. It makes it easy for them. It means that if they want to add words that they're not, I don't know, almost like fleshing it out with things I'd rather they didn't mention, like, oh, he watched swap.avi. It's like, no, don't fucking include that. Or equally, if the bio's too long, I don't really want them like to remove lines that I'd rather keep in. So I suppose in saying that, it was a combination of making things convenient for people, and then quite possibly me controlling what content is put out about me.
Yeah, if we had a nickel for every time we've edited something out of somebody's bio for the sake of brevity, we'd have a bunch of nickels. I don't know how many, but there would be nickels enough to buy a couple sodas at a vending machine, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing with the bio as well is that I'll frequently come back to that page and update it, because I guess something that can be frustrating with like This Is Horror podcast is sometimes you go to an author page and it's like, oh, you kind of last updated this in 2011. So then either I put your really old bio on the podcast, or I have to kind of rewrite it for you. So again, just making things easy and making sure people have the correct information. So, I mean, I know at the moment that it's saying the girl in the video will be published in April. So, you know, pretty soon, 2 days, I'm going to have to put that is already out.
My only recommendation would be so adding a fourth. That's a 3-letter bio or a 3-word bio, and it's just literally Michael David Wilson, and then that's it.
Yeah. I'm so tempted to do that. It's fucking stupid, and that is why. Like, yeah.
Just to please.
So it's already.
Us.
Yeah.
So it's already come up a few times, and we'll give you an opportunity to obviously tell our listeners. I'm going to assume most listeners, it's come up enough that they had to have checked out This Is Horror. But, give our listeners a short look at This Is Horror, and then we want to talk about how you feel the podcast has changed over the course of the years. Because as we kind of mentioned, I don't know if this is off air or not, we haven't talked on the podcast for about 5 years now.
Yeah, so, I mean, This Is Horror podcast is a podcast with over 340 episodes, and in it we interview masters of horror and beyond. But it's not really just about finding out about their books. It's about finding out about who they are as a person and early life lessons. And I mean, so much so that, I mean, often these conversations will go on for a couple of hours, and the first hour is often about them as a person, and then we will get into their actual stories and their work. And in terms of how it has changed over the last few years, or indeed over its history, I mean, first of all, the fact that we're concentrating on these long form conversations is a change, because early doors we were mixing it in with reviews, but I just decided in terms of the direction that I wanted to take it was to have these conversations. Those were the things that interested me the most. I also thought in terms of like, keeping in good spirits with people within the community, it might be better to just have the conversations, because if I review something, I mean, like yourself, you have to be absolutely honest in what you're saying, and sometimes that isn't received as well. And also added to which, I find the conversations more enjoyable for me to have. I think as an interviewer and a conversationalist, one of the most positive changes is probably early on, if something came up and it was a little bit sensitive, I might not necessarily follow up on that. But now, I mean, whether it's going to hurt the person we're talking to in terms of emotional pain, or whether it's going to make people uncomfortable or be controversial, I mean, that is the stuff that I will absolutely follow up on, because I think that is the stuff that is interesting. So, I mean, we've been very candid talking about mental health issues and depression. I've also spoken to people who have had pretty rough childhoods and talking about navigating that pain, and also spoken to people who have lost their life partner. I mean, Steve Raznick Tem was married to Melanie Tem for decades, and then she passed away. And so I spoke at length about that. And I think, not shying away from a question and having these candid and these authentic conversations, that's the kind of stuff that I want to listen to. And I mean, that's kind of my rule with a lot of things that I create. I create the content that I want to have out in the world. And I mean, that really was the same with the girl in the video. It was the kind of story I wanted and enjoyed reading, and thus enjoyed writing too. I think with the podcast, obviously, there are more episodes now. We've even had some weeks where we've put out a couple of episodes. But I mean, like you, I'm always trying to better myself as well. So listening to a lot of other interviews and thinking about, what is the art of the interview and the art of the conversation, and trying to fine tune that. And I'll have some questions that are my go-tos, but then I'll also cycle in others as an experiment to see how well they work. And sometimes they work well and then they become a part of the show, and other times they don't work at all. So, one go and we're done. And of course, another change over the years, and I'm trying to think in terms of when I last spoke with you, it might have been that Dan Howarth was the main co-host, and now, of course, it is Bob Pastorella. And I mean, there's a good connection to Booked there, because I first became familiar with Bob Pastorella because of the Booked anthology. I mean, his story was one of the 3 standout stories for me. And I thought, wow, I've got to kind of get to know this Bob Pastorella guy. And so got him on This Is Horror. And then from there, he wrote a few things for the website. And then when Dan's wife gave birth to their child, he went off on a hiatus, Bob was a stand-in co-host, and well, he's been standing in ever since.
Man, yeah, Bob. Yeah, it's. I know that we probably most of the crossovers or appearances we've done were pre-Bob, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe that last time that you interviewed on our show, maybe he was taking up more of a permanent thing. But the Bob changeover probably was a big change in the podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, Bob is the only co-host of the 3 that I've had that has had the same kind of energy and time to be able to do the show as frequently as I want to. So originally, when it was me, Dan, and John Costello. I mean, John would physically come round to my apartment and we'd record the podcasts. And I mean, he's a busy man, so we're only really putting out an episode every month or so. And then because I wanted to put them out far more regularly than that, I mean, John kind of had to step away. And then with Dan, I was always pushing for it to be a weekly show. And I mean, sometimes he could make it, sometimes he couldn't, but his schedule just didn't allow for podcasting as frequently as I wanted to. And then Bob came into the picture, and yeah, he's up for it. There's been times where I've been like, right, we're putting out a couple of episodes this week and we're doing a story unboxed, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. And I suppose Story Unboxed, which is a Patreon podcast, is the kind of evolution as to the nearest to us still reviewing. And so rather than reviewing, we'll take a classic short story or movie, and then we'll analyze and we'll dissect it. And I suppose, in a way, Lit Reactor has been a bit of an influence on This Is Horror, in that we want to approach these horror texts from a more literary criticism point of view. And so that is what Story Unboxed is.
I'm so glad that you talked about being open and having honest dialogue, because I don't know how this question is going to land. So for a number of years, This Is Horror produced some truly phenomenal chapbooks.
Yeah.
Are you done with chapbooks? And if you are, or tell us what happened, I guess, because it's been quite some time since we've seen something come out from This Is Horror.
I mean, so something that I've been saying for a long time is that you can be good at anything you want, but you can't be good at everything. And so there are different seasons in my life where I focus on different things. And so, I mean, I podcast, I publish, I edit, I write, and often I can do two of those things fairly regularly, but it's quite difficult to have all four going at the same time. Now, the podcast has always been a mainstay, and I mean, I think that is going to be going on, as far as I can imagine. But it was around 2016 where I said, look, I call myself a writer. It's even in the Twitter username, it's Wilson the Writer, but I'm approaching this writing thing very half-heartedly, like that I'm not doing it as frequently as I can. So 2016 and 17 have to be the year where I'm writing, or I just accept that isn't so much a part of my identity as I thought it was. Or perhaps I can change my name to Wilson the Non-Fiction Writer, but that just doesn't sound as catchy. So I knew that to be able to make time for the writing, there were other things that had to kind of go. And I thought at that point I put out 10 chapbooks, well 10 books in fact, because the kind of last 4 releases or so were novellas rather than chapbooks. I know I've established that publishing is something that I can do and that I feel okay about, but my writing is almost a sense of pain and frustration that I feel I haven't proven myself in that arena yet. So I started writing fairly regularly in 2016. Then in 2017, I took it to the next level with the 1 story per week challenge. And I mean, that's kind of reflective of my personality. I don't seem to be very good at easing into things. It's almost an all or nothing. So I did that, and I mean, I haven't really stopped in terms of regularly writing stuff since I made that decision. And now, I can happily call myself a writer. I've, of course, now in a couple of days got The Girl in the Video out, but I've also had a number of short stories published, a lot of them being on the Other Stories podcast. And so a fallout of that was that I had to ease off on publishing. And I thought that, this is time for me to put my energy into my own work, not necessarily into other people's. And since making that decision, I've put out Water for Drowning by Ray Cluley as an audiobook, because I do think that the audio market is not as tapped into as it really should be. I mean, I think any release should get an audiobook, and if it doesn't, that is money that you're missing out on. But also, I mean, this is about creating things that I want to see in the world, and I'm a big audiobook fan. So I did that, and at the moment there is another This Is Horror publication release that will probably be coming out next year. I'm also looking at independently publishing a novella that me and Bob Pastorella have co-written. And there's a temptation to get back into publishing. It's something I enjoy. There are a lot of writers that I want to see put out some of these novellas, but it's just making sure that if I do it, that I have the necessary time and resources to commit to it. And right now, writing and podcasting are the two priorities. So if I do put out more novellas, I've got to make sure that I do it to the best of my ability, and I do it when the time is right. So I keep thinking about it. I want to do it, but where's the time? It might be that I decide to put out a This Is Horror novella every year. That might be the compromise. It's something that I'm thinking about, and I think now that I do feel more secure in my identity as a writer, that there's potential that I can get back into the publishing. So I know that is perhaps a little bit of a meandering answer, but it's the most honest answer I've got for you.
So I think selfishly we asked this question because they're all like the chapbooks that you put out or the novellas that you put out were great, very good stuff. And so I think that's where that came from, was the hopes that maybe there would be more of them. But looking at the stuff that you have published and where some of those stories have kind of evolved is interesting to think about too. So what does it feel like for you to see, for example, The Visible Filth get taken on by Saga Press and released as Wounds, which then became adapted into a movie? Or like recently we were talking to Josh Mallerman about House at the Bottom of the Lake and how that got picked up by Del Rey and now maybe in development for film too. So does that make you feel like, man, I've got a really good eye for good work? Or does that make you feel like, man, they're stealing my shit?
It's a difficult one because there are conflicted emotions. I mean, firstly, it's so good to see some of the stories being picked up and made into films. So to see Wounds on the screen and to, remember first reading that and editing that, and then to see like a proper, fully produced movie was just absolutely fantastic and a real thrill for me. And I think that the movie is incredible. I think it's very faithful to the original text. And so, I mean, that that's probably one of the best and most surreal experiences. I mean, I think it could only really be bettered if one of my own stories is turned into a movie, which hopefully will happen. I mean, I've had someone already inquire about the girl in the video. Nothing's been signed, and this is very early stages. I haven't mentioned that on a podcast, but yeah, I think the girl in the video would lend itself to film. So fingers crossed that will happen. In terms of these stories being picked up by bigger presses, I mean, it's validating in the sense that it shows that I must have a keen eye for these. And of course, I'm happy for Josh and for Nathan to be going on to bigger and more financially lucrative things. There is a slight frustration in the sense that, I mean, some presses have obviously seen these stories are making money, and then the contract has elapsed, and then I can't compete with what is being offered by a bigger publication. And I mean, I'm wondering how much detail to go into, but I mean, certainly with one of those stories, I was going to renew the contract, and I was just fleshing out the details to that. But because it was quite a tumultuous time in my life, I was a little bit slow in getting back to the person about that. And so I think if it had been a better time in my life, then I would have actually re-signed one of those books, and I'd have had the publishing rights for longer, and I would have made a lot more money off it. But, you know, that is on me. But at the same time, I do accept that I can't offer the kind of marketing that Saga or Del Rey can offer. This as horror is not big enough to deliver that, and even to a point to deliver that distribution. I mean, of course, anyone can order in a This Is Horror book, but I don't have the kind of power to get it into supermarkets, and that's the kind of thing that Del Rey, owned by Penguin Random House, I mean, they can do that. They've got a proven track record. So I think ultimately I'm happy for the authors, and I think as well, though, that does go back into the question as to, you know, whether I'm going to do more books or how I feel about it. And I feel when I was first doing the This Is Horror books, there were way less people independently producing novellas, and so there was more of a demand. But I did think, you know, if I produce novellas now, am I actually doing something that no one else is doing? Am I actually creating a market where there's going to be new stories, or is it actually a case that, well, if I don't publish them, they're going to be picked up by someone like Perpetual Motion or Crystal Lake or Grindhouse or Unnerving? I mean, there are so many more small presses now. And I think as well, like seeing these titles get picked up by bigger publishing houses made me aware of my own limitations. And if it turns out that I can't offer, you know, a service that is what these authors want, if there are these limits, then maybe it's better for me to not be in the publishing game and for me to leave it to the people who can satisfy these authors and can meet this demand. And I think having an awareness of my limits is important, because you look at someone like Del Rey, I mean, it's a full publishing house, but with This Is Horror, I mean, I'm essentially editing, I'm marketing, I'm doing the financial accounts. And So if I wanted to expand This Is Horror, it might be a good idea to get individuals in to run these different parts of the press. So it's all about just weighing up the circumstances and the needs at the time. But I am delighted to see both of these books doing so well. Of course, I'd like it from a selfish point of view if I were to financially benefit a little bit more from that. But, you know, I signed a contract for a limited period of time. We honored the contract. We both made money out of it. It was a successful partnership. And I mean, I said to one of them, because one of the authors was pretty reluctant about doing it and didn't want to, you know, go away from This Is Horror. But I said, look, this is more money for you. If it was me, I'd go for the one that gets me more money. This is a business decision, and any publisher or any reasonable person is not going to fall out with someone, or it's not going to think someone is shitty because they didn't renew a contract. You know, the contract that we agreed to has been fulfilled. So it's done. And if you have a deal where you can now make more money, why wouldn't you take it?
A couple of things I just want to say. So this is something I've said before, probably not to you directly, but I've always been impressed at how many balls you could keep in the air at the same time. So the website, the publishing, the podcast, and then your own personal writing is way more than Rob and I collectively would ever try to do. And there's two of us, spearheading the operation. So kudos for you. Also, I want to say that I appreciate the honesty, right? So a lot of times we talk to a lot of people and we don't talk about money. And here's where I'll say that for Rob and I doing this podcast for years and years, like, money is one of those things we never think about. So I really appreciate your honesty, because there's that component to not just being a writer, but to being a podcaster or an owner of a website or any of the ventures that you mentioned, that, you know, there's a financial aspect to it that I don't think we're open enough about on a regular basis. So again, I really appreciate your being candid in your answer. That being said, we've talked about a lot of things that might be coming up. What do you think we'll see next, either from you on a personal level or from the This Is Horror banner?
Well, I mean, are we talking just about publications, or are we talking about anything? Just anything you're excited about. Well, I can tell you that in a matter of weeks, if not this week, you will find out the This Is Horror Award shortlist, which kind of turns up later and later in the year every fucking year. And that may have something to do with time constraints, but it turned up in April last year. It's turning up again in April this year. In terms of a This Is Horror story, I mean, actually, with the girl in the video, the paperback and the ebook is being put out by Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, but the audio rights were left to me. So I am putting out the audiobook. It is narrated by R.J. Bailey, who did Water for Drowning, and that will be out in a matter of weeks. I mean, we've just finalized the edits for that now, and I'm very excited about that. I mentioned, of course, that we've got People Ritual by myself and Bob Pastorella. We're going to be putting that out as a hardback to begin with. So this will be the first hardback that I've put out. And then, of course, it will be available later in all formats. I mean, I can tell you that going forward, any time that I put out a book, or This Is Horror does, there will be an audiobook version, because I just think this is the market and the time that we're living in. And also, even if I didn't make much of a profit off it, it's something that I personally want to see. And I think it's such a growing market that it's something that's an investment for years to come. And in terms of the podcast, I mean, we're putting out weekly content. We're going to be chatting with a number of people that we haven't spoken to before, people like Lawrence Block and Sarah Pinborough and John Horner Jacobs. So we've got a lot of new content and a lot of new guests coming in 2020. And we're always looking to grow and to get better. And so, I mean, on that note, for people who listen to the podcast, I mean, it's great to hear what you like, but it's also valid and valuable for you to let us know what you don't like. So certainly, don't be afraid to get in contact and to let us know how it's working for you.
Well, Michael, thanks for taking time out of a chaotic schedule pre-release to talk to us about The Girl in the Video. It's been a blast. Let's not make it 5 years before we do this again.
Hey, yeah, certainly. And I mean, this has been a lot of fun, and it feels right, and it feels full circle almost. That, I mean, Booked is one of the podcasts that influenced This Is Horror. I've always been very open about that and saying that the three podcasts that influenced us were Booked, Horror, etc., and The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. So for you to have influenced This Is Horror, and for me to now be on promoting a book that I've written, it feels full circle and it feels good. So thank you very much.
All right. What a great conversation with Michael. And again, I want to make sure that I put it out there. The book is coming out April 28th. So definitely check that out. Pick up a copy when that comes out.
For sure. And you heard us talk quite a bit about This Is Horror, the podcast, and you can find that and all This Is Horror things at thisishorror.co.uk. Also, just by searching This Is Horror, it's the first result. I just checked. But yeah, great conversation. Go out and pre-order, or at this point, I mean, probably just straight order, but depending on when you're listening, The Girl in the Video, it's a fun time. And apologies to anybody who listened to all that stuff about weird internet videos and stuff, because I was really getting into it, and I was like, oh my God, Rob is sitting very quietly and not saying a word, and I'm thinking, oh man, I wonder how many people turn this shit off. So if you're still here, apologies, but Google swap.avi. Let us know what you think.
All right. Coming up next episode is going to be our review of The Bank by Bentley Little. I just finished it last night, and I'm looking forward to the conversation because it was an interesting read for sure.
I have not yet finished it, but I will say that definitely an interesting book. So this one should be a lot of fun. So come back in just a few days to check that out.
That's going to wrap it up for this one. Until next time, I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Ned, and keep reading.